They discharged me from the hospital 3 days after the surgery, though my doctor had said I'd need a week, maybe more. I remember blinking up at the fluorescent lights, still cloudy from anesthesia, when the nurse told me my family had arranged everything. "You'll be more comfortable at home," she said. But no one was waiting for me outside. It was a ride share, a young man in a Prius. He said my daughter had booked him, handed me a plastic pharmacy bag with 2 prescriptions, and asked if I needed help buckling my seatbelt. I didn't even know where my phone was. The house key they gave me at the front desk didn't work. I stood on the porch in my hospital socks, pressing the doorbell like a stranger. No lights came on. I called from the driver's phone. First my daughter, then my son. No one picked up. The third call to my sister went straight to voicemail. I sat down on the steps and tried to breathe through the pain in my abdomen. My hospital gown was still beneath my coat. The world spun, and I felt like an idiot worse than that. I felt invisible. It was the neighbor Steve who finally noticed me. He came over slowly, with that awkward kindness people use when they see someone broken in public. I asked if I could use his phone. He let me inside, offered tea. When I told him my family had changed the locks while I was in surgery, he looked away, said, "That doesn't sound like them." But it did. It sounded exactly like them now. I ended up at a roadside motel off the interstate, the kind with bulletproof glass around the reception and a flickering neon Wi-Fi sign. I checked in under my maiden name, though I didn't really know why. I guess I wanted a version of myself they couldn't touch. The room smelled like damp carpet and microwave dinners. I stood in the bathroom under a yellowed light bulb and looked at the pale scar along my stomach, still fresh, still angry. My body had been cut open and stitched back together, and now so had my life. That night, I called the hospital. I asked who had authorized my discharge. The woman on the phone said, "According to the file, your husband did. He said it was in your best interest." I didn't cry. Not then. There's a kind of grief so sharp, it doesn't leave room for tears. It just settles into your bones and waits. I didn't sleep. I lay on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling, remembering the way my daughter's voice used to sound when she was 4 and needed me in the night. I remembered the time I held my son's hand in court when he was 19 and terrified. I remembered all the Sunday roasts, the birthday candles, the calls to my sister when her marriage fell apart. And I thought they knew what they were doing. This wasn't a mistake. This was an erasure. The next morning, I walked to a pharmacy for bandages and a charger. I didn't recognize myself in the glass of the freezer door. Pale, sunken, ghostly. I watched a woman brush past me with her toddler and wondered what I must have looked like to her, an old woman with a bent back and hospital hair. Disposable, weak. At the checkout, I used the last $47 on my debit card. Everything else had been joint accounts, frozen, gone. I walked 2 miles back to the motel. Every step felt like a betrayal to my body, to my past, to the woman I had been just a week ago. When I reached the room, there was a message on the motel phone. My husband's voice, stiff and rehearsed. "Hope you're doing okay. The kids and I thought it'd be better this way. Less stress. We'll talk when you're ready." I played it 3 times. Then I deleted it. I opened my bag and found a single thing they'd left behind from the house, my sketch pad. Tucked into the front pocket, as if someone had thought, "This won't matter." They had no idea what they were handing back to me. I sat on the motel bed and opened it to a blank page. I hadn't drawn in 27 years. My hand shook, but I drew anyway. Not a house, not a person, just lines reaching, curling, rebuilding. That was the first night I didn't feel completely erased. I wasn't always someone who had to hide behind a motel room door, waiting for the world to forget she existed. Once I mattered. I belonged. I met my husband in the first-year design studio at Berkeley. He was magnetic in that unbothered way, tall, always running late, always surrounded by people who waited anyway. I was quieter, more precise. I thought in grids and elevations. He thought in chaos. He'd show up with wild ideas and no plan, and I'd build the foundation beneath them. That was how we worked. We married young before either of us had a chance to become anyone else. At 24, we bought a fixer-upper just outside Sacramento with uneven floors and too many windows. I made it a home while he bounced from one venture to another, design consulting a vegan food truck, a startup that claimed it could predict traffic patterns. When I got pregnant with our first child, I told him I'd take a break from architecture just until the baby started school. "I'll go back," I said. "It's temporary." He kissed my forehead and said, "You're already the architect of everything that matters." It sounded beautiful then, a compliment. I didn't know it was a sentence. I stayed home for 19 years, through 3 children, through lice outbreaks and college applications, through his bankruptcies, his migraines, his disappearances into projects. I was the constant, the one who remembered what everyone needed before they knew they needed it. I packed lunches with hand-cut fruit. I ran the PTA fundraisers. I taught my youngest how to sew buttons on a Sunday afternoon because she said she hated feeling useless. And slowly, I forgot what it felt like to be seen. Even when I worked freelance drafting gigs for former classmates, a couple of kitchen remodels for neighbors, it was always framed as extra, a hobby. Mom's little projects, they called them. I never fought the language. I thought my loyalty would be its own kind of proof. I thought they knew. There was a moment, I remember it, with unnatural clarity. It was winter. My mother had just passed. I was standing in the kitchen, elbow deep in dishwater, when I overheard my husband say to our oldest, "She's just been tired since Nana died. I think she's losing her spark a little." Like I was a toy winding down. Like my grief wasn't a roar, but a malfunction. That was the first time I looked at him and didn't recognize the voice he used when he talked about me. It wasn't cruel, just detached, clinical, like he'd begun preparing himself to live without me long before I ever left. Still, I stayed. I told myself it was a season, a rough patch. We were older now. The kids were almost grown. Things would shift. I was wrong. They did shift, but not the way I expected. I stopped being the center of the family and started orbiting them unnoticed. Holidays were planned without my input. Jokes flew over dinner that I didn't understand. I was tired, yes, but I wasn't blind. I watched my sister start calling my daughter instead of me. I watched my son tell his father about his new job offer before mentioning it to me in passing. I watched myself become a background hum in the life I had built. And still I cooked. I folded. I stayed. There's a particular cruelty in being forgotten while you're still standing in the room. I used to believe love was measured in sacrifices, in the number of nights you gave up sleep for someone else, in the way you softened your voice even when you wanted to scream. I didn't realize that the longer you bend without breaking, the more people assume you never could, and so they began to press harder. By the time I got sick, I was already halfway gone. My name didn't carry weight anymore. I was just Mom, or she's resting, or she probably wouldn't want to come. But I did want to come. I always wanted to be asked. When they said I needed surgery, I saw fear in my daughter's eyes, but it wasn't fear for me. It was fear of the inconvenience. She kept asking about timing, about recovery, about whether I'd need someone full-time. I assured her I'd manage, that the procedure was minor, that I'd bounce back quickly. She smiled with her mouth only. Looking back, I realized they didn't believe I would come back, or maybe they didn't want me to. It's hard to say which would hurt more. In those last weeks before the operation, I began writing little notes to myself in the margins of my old sketchbooks. One said, "You were not born for the background." Another said, "Dignity is not given, it's remembered." I didn't know then how much I'd need those words, but I do now. Because in their absence, I began to see myself more clearly than I had in decades, and what I saw was someone worth saving. The quiet doesn't come all at once. It creeps. At first it looked like long pauses between conversations, a forgotten text, a missed call. I'd call my daughter, and the phone would ring until voicemail. She'd answer hours later with, "Sorry." I've been swamped her voice already halfway out the door. Then came the dinners. Everyone ate quickly, phones on the table eyes, flicking up only when I asked a question. Once I spent the whole day cooking my son's favorite rosemary lamb garlic potatoes glazed carrots. He arrived late, already full from lunch with coworkers. Said it smelled amazing, though, and thanked me from the hallway as he left again. I washed the plates alone. Even my husband had started speaking in shorthand. "Back late, client call, don't wait up." His voice had edges it didn't used to have. He stopped asking me about my day. I don't remember when we stopped touching. We used to lie in bed, feet tangled, whispering until sleep took one of us. Now he rolled away before the light went out. It's hard to name the moment when a family stops being a family. There's no headline, no funeral, no crash, just a slow subtraction of presence, a silence that stretches longer and longer until it becomes the new language. One night I woke from a dream, something about a library collapsing, and reached for him. My hand landed on cold sheets. I sat up. The bathroom light was off. The car wasn't in the drive. I waited an hour before texting him. He didn't respond. He never told me where he'd been. After that, I stopped asking. I began talking to myself more, whispering little reminders aloud. You are here. You are real. You are not what they forget. Some nights I stood in the kitchen watching the motion light flicker on outside. No one ever came up the drive, but I still looked. I started sketching again in secret, late at night. When the house slept, I pulled out my old pads and pencils. I drew places I'd never been: crumbling villas, coastal cottages, solitary towers with vines growing through the stone. Places that felt like solitude, but not loneliness. I didn't know it then, but I was building a map. The more they disappeared, the more I returned to myself. My sister used to call every Friday. Then it became once a month. Then only when she needed something: old family photos, a recipe, a name she couldn't remember. The last time she called before the hospital, it was to ask about our mother's favorite hymn. She didn't even ask how I was. "Do you think they still need me?" I asked her once, trying to keep my voice light. She paused. "They love you," she said. That wasn't the question. I began to notice how they framed me. My son once joked to a friend that I was basically retired from life. I laughed then. I even repeated it once at a family party, trying to own it. But the sting stayed. They called me forgetful when I missed appointments, called me emotional when I cried at the movies, called me fragile when I said I needed rest. None of them noticed I was shrinking to fit their definitions, and I let them until the day I couldn't anymore. It was a Tuesday. I was walking back from the grocery store with a single bag bread milk tea. I saw them before they saw me. My husband, my daughter sitting in a cafe window with a man in a blazer. I paused, watched. They were laughing, leaning in close. When I opened the door that afternoon, my daughter was home. She looked up from her laptop and smiled. "Hey, I was just about to text you," she said. I went to my room and closed the door. I didn't ask. That was the day I understood what it meant to be erased while still living in the same house, to have your presence reduced to utility, your voice marked as disruption, your memory filed under inconvenience. They weren't angry with me. They were done with me. That night I packed a small bag, just in case, and the next day I scheduled the surgery. Alone. I told no one, because I needed to see what they would do if I stopped reminding them who I was. And I found out. The week before the operation, my son left town for a conference. My daughter missed our lunch. My husband spent 3 nights at the office. No one asked if I had a ride to the hospital, so I took a cab, checked myself in, handed the nurse a list of emergency contacts with every name left blank. Even unconscious, I was alone. And when I woke, they had already signed me out. Not one of them came to see if I had made it through. Not one. The legal document was tucked beneath a stack of junk mail on his desk, folded once like something casually handled, not hidden. I found it a week after they locked me out in a place I hadn't expected to return to, but something in me had insisted. Closure, maybe, or something meaner. I used the spare key he didn't know I still had. The house was still the same sunlight through the kitchen window, the scent of cinnamon candles, the dull hum of the refrigerator. But something had shifted. My photos were gone. The hallway wall that once held family portraits now displayed a minimalist canvas, white on white, blank on blank. I walked like a stranger through the rooms I'd once designed for comfort, now cold in their precision. My sewing machine had been boxed, my sketchbook shelved too high to reach without a step stool, my teacups replaced with sleek glass mugs that looked like they'd never known steam. In his office, I paused. The air smelled like leather and cedarwood, his cologne. The chair still creaked under my weight. I opened the top drawer, looking for what exactly I wasn't sure, but then I found it. A power of attorney form signed by him and notarized dated 2 weeks before my surgery, naming him as sole decision-maker in the event of my diminished mental capacity. Attached were doctor's notes, some I recognized from routine checkups, others I'd never seen. One claimed signs of cognitive decline. It was a lie. I stared at my own name in unfamiliar script, printed, underlined, framed as if I were a risk to myself, a legal burden, a contingency plan. I sat still for a long time. My hands didn't shake. My breath stayed steady, but something inside me cracked like ice beneath a boot. He had rewritten me, not just emotionally, but legally. He hadn't just erased me from the table, he'd done it with paperwork. I flipped to the last page. His signature, my daughter's as witness, my son's initials in the margin. They had all agreed, in silence, in strategy, in the smooth language of adult justification. The betrayal wasn't just in the action, it was in the choreography, the planning, the consensus. They didn't even tell me. They'd assumed I wouldn't notice, or that when I did, it would be too late to matter. I took the papers and slid them into my coat. Back at the motel, I read every word. I annotated them in red ink, circling phrases like temporary incompetence and financial discretion. I wasn't just erased, I was preemptively neutralized. They hadn't seen me as vulnerable. They'd seen me as inconvenient. I thought of my daughter's careful hands as she braided my hair in childhood, of my son falling asleep on my chest during storms, of my husband whispering promises into my neck on that first Christmas in the old house. And I wondered, how does love become paperwork? How does a woman become a signature to be filed? I wrote a letter that night, not in anger, not to demand anything, just to tell the truth. I addressed it to each of them, 3 copies. I wrote, I found the papers. I understand what you did. I am not confused. I am not unstable. I am not unaware. You made a choice to act without me. That choice has consequences. I will not return. I will not contest, but I will not forget. I signed it with my full name, the one I had before marriage, and I mailed it from the corner drop box at dawn. No forwarding address, no return stamp. They would read it. They would know. I booked a room under a new name, a different town, a smaller place by the coast where no one knew my face or my story. I used cash. I carried only 1 bag, 1 coat, 1 notebook. I left my phone in the motel drawer. No one called it anyway. As the train pulled away, I watched the city fade into blur. No tears, no second thoughts, just a silence so complete it felt holy. I didn't leave to punish them. I left to remember myself without them. And for the first time in years, I felt real. 3 weeks passed before the first call came. I didn't answer. The number was familiar, my daughter's, but the voice in my memory was no longer mine to comfort. I stared at the screen until it went dark again, leaving only my reflection pale and weightless in the glass. She called 3 more times that day. No voicemail, no apology, just persistence. By then, I'd settled into the upstairs unit of a weathered blue house near the cliffs. The walls slanted slightly, and you could hear the sea whisper through the cracks when the wind picked up. The landlord was a retired woodworker who lived below and never asked questions. I paid him in cash. He gave me the spare key on a shell necklace. I furnished the place with quiet things: a used kettle, a mattress on the floor, a thrifted table that sloped to one side. I didn't need much. I wanted even less. Each morning, I walked the shore. The first few days, I stayed close to the edges, nervous, still carrying the rhythm of my old life like a ticking in my chest. I kept looking over my shoulder, waiting to be called back, but no one came. No one sent flowers. No one sent police. They had erased me, but they didn't chase the ghost. In the afternoons, I drew, not for anyone else, not for display, just lines and shadows and imagined spaces. I started with ruins, half-collapsed bridges, abandoned stations, houses with ivy growing through the roof. But over time, something shifted. I began sketching repairs, patches, beams, rebuilt windows, the same structures, but reimagined. I didn't notice the shift until one day I looked down and realized I'd drawn a house with light inside. That night, I turned my phone back on. No missed calls, just the old voicemails, 7 from my daughter, 3 from my sister, 1 from a number I didn't recognize, none from him. I listened to the first. Her voice was shaking, trying not to sound like it. "Mom, if you get this, I think we need to talk. I think we need to explain." A pause. I didn't know the papers meant that. I thought it was temporary, just for emergencies. I saved that message, not out of forgiveness, but because it proved they hadn't expected me to walk. I listened to another. "Dad says we did what we had to, that you weren't stable, but I'm not sure. I've been thinking about it, about you, about everything." There it was, the first tremor. I didn't call back, not then. The next week, a letter arrived. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting, my sister's. It was 5 pages long. She told me she regretted signing anything, that she didn't know how to say no when everyone else said yes, that she never imagined I'd actually leave. She included a photo, me in my 20s holding her daughter on the day she was born. I looked like someone who still believed people would stay if you loved them enough. I burned it in a metal dish on the porch, not out of hate, out of clarity. There are some things you don't return to. And then one evening, my daughter called again. This time I answered. The silence between her breath and my name was almost enough to make me hang up. But I didn't. She whispered I didn't know what we were doing. I thought we were protecting you. You weren't, I said. Another silence. Do you hate me? No, I said. But I don't trust you. She cried quietly. Didn't ask me to come back. Didn't beg for absolution. Just sat in the space I left open. I let her stay there for a while. Then I said, you made your choice. I'm making mine. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. A few weeks later, I changed my name. Not legally, not yet. But I started introducing myself as Claire, my middle name, the one no one ever used. It felt strange at first, but honest. In town, people knew me as the woman who drew quiet houses, who walked the cliffs every morning and bought pears in pairs. No one asked where I came from. They asked what I was building. I liked that. I wasn't building walls. I was building absence that had shape. Sometimes I missed them, not as they were, but as they had once been. I missed my children's little hands, my sister's teenage laughter, the way my husband used to reach for me in the dark. But those weren't recoverable. They were fossils pressed into a life I no longer inhabited. I didn't need vengeance. I needed air. And here, finally, I could breathe. The town didn't ask questions. It let me be. There was a small cafe 2 blocks down where the tables wobbled and the coffee tasted like burnt almonds. I went every morning at 8 and ordered the same thing, black tea, no sugar, 1 slice of toast with butter, and a half-sliced pear. The waitress called me ma'am for the first week, then Claire after I told her once, softly over the counter. She didn't ask for a last name. They pinned my sketches on the community board. Not the ones of ruins anymore. These were homes with open doors, gardens breaking through gravel windows glowing. Someone offered to buy one. I declined. They weren't for sale. They were memory. They were proof. One Thursday, an envelope arrived with no postage, just my first name written in looping, uneven print. I opened it at the cafe. Inside was a crumpled note from my son, in the kind of handwriting you use when you're not sure if you should be writing at all. Mom, I know I didn't protect you. I know I didn't even see you. I think about that night at the hospital. You looked so small, and I told myself you'd be fine. But the truth is, I didn't want to deal with what it meant if you weren't. I was scared, but that doesn't excuse what we did. I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you're somewhere safe, somewhere that feels like yours. I didn't cry. I folded the letter and slipped it into the back of my sketchbook, not to revisit, just to carry. The weight was different now, not heavier, just real. That weekend, the cafe owner asked if I wanted to join the Sunday potluck. I hesitated, then said yes. I brought lentils and lemon rice in a battered pot and sat between a retired nurse and a widower who made birdhouses. We didn't talk about our pasts. We talked about carrots, about paint, about the sound of rain on old tin. That night, I walked home without feeling watched by the past. I left my porch light off and opened the window wide. The air smelled like salt and rosemary. Somewhere down the street, wind chimes clinked gently. I closed my eyes and counted the spaces I used to occupy the carpool line, the grocery list, the couch at 3 a.m. when someone had a fever. I felt the echoes without needing to answer them. My old life hadn't vanished. I had stepped out of it. They'd built a narrative where I was fragile, erratic, fading. But I wasn't. I was unfinished. I sat at my table and pulled out a clean sheet of paper. No graphite yet, just breath. What does a reclaimed life look like? It looks like a home where you lock the door because it's yours, not because you fear who might come. It looks like tea that never goes cold because you finally drink it. It looks like morning silence that isn't emptiness, it's peace. The next day, I went to the post office and opened a new box under my new name. No one had asked for it, but I wanted a place where letters could find me if they chose to. No guarantees, no expectations, just a space, like me, unclaimed but finally whole. I used to think silence meant abandonment. Now I understand it can also mean sovereignty. I remember the way the house used to sound in the morning drawers, sliding open the soft pad of bare feet on wood, my husband's low cough in the hallway, the clink of dishes. There was always movement, always interruption, always something to tend to before the kettle even began to hiss. Now I wake to the hush of waves folding over themselves and the cry of gulls overhead. Some mornings the wind pushes through the cracks in the windows, touching my face like a question. Other mornings it's so still I can hear the pulse in my own wrist. There's no one to ask what I want for breakfast. No one to correct what I've forgotten. No one to reroute my day with a new need. And for the first time, that absence doesn't ache. It steadies me. I've started sketching the people in town, not their faces. Faces are too intimate, too assumptive, but the way they hold themselves, the way the fisherman at the dock leans on his right hip as he guts a mackerel, the way the bookstore owner hunches as she restocks the used shelf, the way the schoolboys run hair-wild backpacks bouncing. Every drawing is a kind of witnessing. I'm learning to see again, not just to be seen. One afternoon, while sitting on the rocks with a sketch pad across my knees, I saw a woman walking the beach alone. She wore a long red coat and a scarf that whipped behind her like a sail. Her back was straight, her steps deliberate. She reminded me of the woman I might have been if no one had ever taught me to shrink. She walked past without looking up. I didn't draw her. Some people aren't to be captured. They're to be remembered in motion. A week later, I got a package at the P.O. box. No return label, just a brown parcel with a soft bulge. Inside was my old wool cardigan gray with worn cuffs and a loose button at the neck, and a note. You left this in the front hall closet. I wasn't sure if you wanted it. I hope it still smells like you. I hope it still feels like home. L, my sister. I pressed the cardigan to my face and inhaled. It smelled like cedar, like the hallway I used to walk through every day without noticing. I didn't cry, but my knees did buckle slightly, and I had to sit. I didn't write her back. Not yet. The cardigan hung over the back of my chair for 3 days before I put it on. The fabric felt softer than I remembered, like it had aged into gentleness. Like me. At the market that Friday, the man behind the honey stall asked if I wanted my usual. I said yes, but added a jar of wildflower this time. He nodded and said, "Trying something new." I didn't mean to say it aloud, but I did. Becoming someone new. He smiled like he understood. There is a slowness to healing that no one tells you about. People expect rebirth to be dramatic phoenix, from flames banners and anthems. But it's quieter than that. It's in the way you fold your clothes, in the way you answer only the calls you want, in the way you laugh at something without checking to see who's listening. Some evenings, I still feel the pull, the temptation to scroll through their lives online, to see what they've posted, what they're saying, how easily they've replaced the space I left behind. But I don't. Not because I don't care, but because I do. Too much. And because healing, I've learned, is often just discipline dressed as grace. I keep the letter from my son in the drawer beside my bed. I've read it twice since. Once when the wind knocked the power out for 3 hours, and I lit candles like a ritual. Once, when I thought I saw my daughter's hair in the crowd at the bakery and had to leave without buying anything. I don't know if I'll ever see them again. But I'm learning to live without the need for that answer. Because this life, this version of myself, I'm slowly growing into, it doesn't depend on their return. It depends only on my refusal to vanish. And that more than any apology is the beginning of forgiveness. There's a white chair by the window now. It's nothing special secondhand, a little frayed at the corners, but wide enough for my legs to fold beneath me, and low enough that I can rest my elbows on the sill while I read. I call it my lookout. From that chair, I've watched fog swallow the town whole. I've seen gulls fight over crusts of bread like kings at war. I've seen lovers arguing in cars, then kissing at stoplights. I've watched storms roll in and children chase each other through puddles like nothing could ever hurt them. It's become a habit, this sitting. Not idleness, but something else, a witnessing of the world, of myself. The first winter here was harsh. Salt air stung my healing skin, and the heater wheezed like an old man dying in the corner. Some nights I layered 3 sweaters and still felt the cold creep into my bones. But the cold reminded me I was alive, that I had nerve endings, that my body battered and betrayed was still mine. I didn't go home for Christmas. They didn't ask me to. I spent the morning walking the cliffs, the wind so strong I had to lean into it to stay upright. I shouted my own name into the void just to hear it swallowed by the wind. Claire, Claire, Claire. When I got back, I made soup and lit every candle I owned. I put on music that had no words, just cello and slow breath and space, and sketched by the window until the sun sank behind the sea, like a held breath finally exhaled. That night, I dreamed of a house I'd never seen. It had red shutters and a crooked chimney. In the dream, I lived there alone, but I never felt lonely. I was full, rooted, real. I sketched it the next morning, every crooked detail. I called it after, not home, just after. A place that exists only when you finally admit the before was never coming back. One afternoon in January, a stranger knocked on my door. She was young 20s, maybe hair dyed lavender, and a nervous energy behind her smile. Said she was from the town's arts initiative, heard I'd been sketching houses around the cliffs, wanted to know if I'd be willing to teach a workshop. I nearly laughed. Me teach. But something in me stilled. That quiet again. That soft place where something new could grow. I said yes. The first session had 3 students, a widow, a teenager with pink headphones, a man who didn't speak, only drew with short, furious strokes. We met in the back room of the library, all dusty sunlight and squeaky floors. I didn't teach technique, not really. I taught them how to notice, to see the way a railing curls when someone's loved it for too long, to draw the weight of an open door, to let silence into the lines. At the end of the month, we hung our sketches in the town hall. People came. They whispered in front of the drawings. They nodded. One woman cried. And for the first time in years, my name was spoken without tension. Claire, like it belonged to someone worth listening to. That night, I walked home under a sky so clear it hurt to look at. Stars like cold fire, moon like a witness. I passed the bakery, the bookstore, the cafe, and stopped outside a little shop with a sign in the window, looking for part-time help. No experience needed, just heart. I stood there for a while, not because I needed the job, but because I needed to remember I could still be chosen. The next morning I went in and introduced myself. The owner smiled and said I was hoping you'd come. She didn't know my story. She didn't know what I'd survived, but somehow she saw the beginning in me. That was the moment I understood I hadn't been erased. I had been paused, and now slowly I was pressing play. The first time someone hugged me in that town, it was accidental. One of the women from my drawing class, Lorraine, had just found out her sister was in remission. She stood up too quickly, tears already falling, and wrapped her arms around the first person near her, me. She held on a little longer than most would. Her breath hitched against my shoulder, and for a second I didn't move. I hadn't been held in so long, not out of need or duty, but out of joy. Her joy. I felt it seep into me like warmth into frozen cloth. After she let go, she apologized. I said nothing. I just smiled. But that night when I lay down, I found myself reaching for that moment again, in the dark, like a child pressing a seashell to her ear. It's strange how the body remembers touch, even when the mind tries to forget. I've come to believe grief isn't something that ends. It's something that folds into you layer by layer until it becomes muscle. You carry it always, but you also grow strong beneath it. One Sunday, I visited the old church on the hill. I'm not religious, but I'd seen the doors open every week, and something about their quiet invitation felt familiar. Inside, it smelled of pine and candle wax. The pews were polished by time. An old woman with a braid down her back handed me a hymnal even though I didn't sing. I sat in the back, just watched. The preacher spoke about mercy, not the grand kind that saves lives, but the small kind that chooses not to harden. Afterward, the woman turned to me and said, "You look like someone who's survived a great fire." I didn't ask how she knew. I just said, "I'm still a little warm." We both laughed. In town, they still don't know what I left, what I came from. They've heard fragments, I'm sure. Small-town kindness doesn't mean small-town ignorance, but no one asks. They let me arrive without unpacking everything I carried. One morning in spring, I took a longer walk than usual, past the edge of the cliffs down the dirt path that looped behind the dunes. At the end of it stood a tiny abandoned shack, roof caved, door askew. It had likely belonged to a fisherman once. I sat across from it and began to draw. I gave it new walls, a chimney, a wide porch, a garden overflowing with fennel and thyme. I sketched windows with curtains blowing inward as if someone had just opened them after a long sleep. I called it re-entry, a place not to escape to, but to return through. That evening, I received a message at my postbox, typed, brief, just checking that you're alive. No pressure, just, "I miss you. D, my daughter. No mom, just an initial," as if she was afraid to assume the right. I folded the message slowly and placed it beside my son's letter. I did not respond, but I whispered her name that night, into the pillow, like a prayer or a spell, not to summon her, to remember the shape of her. Memory is tricky. It rewrites. It softens the edges. I sometimes think I'm forgetting their voices, but then I hear a word in the street, a laugh from a passerby, and my body tenses, not in fear, in readiness, like it still expects the worst. But nothing comes. The worst has already happened, and I survived it. Now I sketch in the mornings and teach in the afternoons. I help at the little shop twice a week. I go to the potlucks, the poetry nights, the silent auctions. No one there knows I was once considered mentally unfit. No one there has seen a version of me bent under the weight of family expectations. Here I am, only Claire, and that is enough. Sometimes when I walk past the cliffs at sunset, I wonder if they miss me, not the people, but the versions of themselves they used to be with me near. I wonder if my husband hears silence now, where I used to stand. If my daughter hesitates before deleting my contact. If my son still rereads my letter in the dark. But I never let those thoughts linger long, because I've learned that wondering is a kind of leash, and I've had enough of those. I am not waiting to be welcomed back. I am learning how to welcome myself forward, every single day. The letter came in May, wrapped in plain white, with no return address, but postmarked from Sacramento. The handwriting was unmistakable his. Angular, economical, like everything he built, quick, efficient, devoid of excess. I didn't open it right away. I left it on the kitchen table beneath the fruit bowl, as if the weight of the apples might keep it from breathing. For 2 days, I moved around it, made tea beside it, sketched beside it, even dreamed beside it, though in the dream it had teeth. On the 3rd day, I opened it. Inside were 3 things: a single sheet of paper unsigned, a key, and a photograph. The photo was old me at 31, asleep in the backyard hammock, with our youngest curled into my side, sunlight in my hair, grass stains on my jeans, a soft smile on a face that had not yet learned to hold back. The letter was typed, brief, unadorned. I know you probably won't read this, and I know I've forfeited the right to say anything that matters. But I saw this photo in the garage, and something broke. You were never weak. I think I told myself that lie to justify the choices I made. The truth is, I was afraid of your strength, and I convinced everyone else they should be too. I've kept your studio locked. I haven't touched a thing. The key is yours. I know you won't use it, but I couldn't keep it anymore. No name, just that flat signature line, blank. I held the key in my palm until the metal warmed. I thought of my studio, the tiny sunroom off the garage I'd painted mint green and filled with plants and graphite, and the gentle disarray of someone who believes she has all the time in the world. I hadn't seen that room in nearly a year. I placed the key in the back of my drawer with the others, the old house key, the storage box from college, a lock I couldn't even remember owning, and I left it there. There was a time I would have driven back, a time I would have called, first offered the olive branch, asked to walk through the room just once to say goodbye. But not now. Closure, I've learned, is a myth people offer so they don't have to face permanence. What I needed wasn't closure. It was permission from myself to no longer need it. Later that week, I walked past the shack I'd sketched in winter, the one I'd named after. A local contractor had begun to work on it, new shingles, a replaced door scaffolding, rising like ribs. It looked alive again. Not because someone had restored it to what it was, but because someone had imagined what it could be. I stood there a long time. Maybe we're all just old structures waiting for someone to believe we're worth the repair. Or maybe we have to become our own builders. At the end of class that Friday, the teenager with the headphones handed me a sketch. I recognized the lines instantly, me, seated in the white window chair, knees folded, pencil midair. You looked peaceful, she said. I didn't know how to draw the feeling, so I tried your method. I let the silence in. I nodded, throat too thick to speak. After she left, I turned the drawing over and wrote on the back, yes, that's it. That's exactly it. That weekend, I hung it on my wall, not framed, just pinned. It reminded me that healing isn't just what you do in solitude. It's what others see in you when you forget to guard your reflection. I no longer check the old family account. I no longer wonder what they tell people about me. Maybe I'm a ghost. Maybe I'm a villain. Maybe I'm the cautionary tale whispered over wine. I don't care, because I am also something else entirely. I am a woman who left, not because she was broken, but because she was done being broken for others. The tide was high that morning. The foam reached all the way to the dunes, leaving trails of seaweed and crushed shells along the path. I walked barefoot, letting the cold bite into me, anchoring me to the moment. My breath came out in soft clouds, and with every step I whispered a name I used to carry: wife, mother, sister, caretaker. I whispered each one and let it fall behind me like a stone into the surf. I didn't say them in anger, just in farewell. I wasn't shedding them out of spite. I was releasing them the way you release something that's outlived its usefulness, like a dress that no longer fits, like a song whose lyrics no longer make sense. There was no audience for it, just me and the wind and the sound of the sea. That evening, the town hosted a spring festival. Paper lanterns lined the streets, swaying from fishing lines strung between lamp posts. Children ran in tight circles, faces painted with dragons and glitter. I stood in the corner beside the cider stand cup, warming my fingers, watching it all like someone newly born. A woman came up to me, one of the bookstore volunteers. She said, "You have a kindness in your eyes, but also something else." I smiled. Sharpness. She shook her head. No, distance, like someone who's seen too much beauty vanish. I didn't answer. There was nothing to add. We stood there a while, sipping quietly, watching the lanterns flicker as the wind tried to take them. She said I used to be married. He left in the middle of the night, took the car, the dog, and the record player. I nodded. Everyone told me to burn his letters. I kept them. Still do. I looked at her, then really looked. She wasn't waiting for advice. She was offering kinship. I said I keep things too. She touched my shoulder gently and walked away. That night I wrote a list, not of tasks, not of dreams, just a list of truths. 1. I am not fragile. 2. I am not to blame for other people's fears. 3. I do not need to be forgiven for leaving. 4. I do not regret the love I gave. 5. I do not need their understanding to be whole. I folded the paper and placed it beneath my pillow. That same night, I received an email from my daughter, just a few lines. I've been thinking about the way we watched you disappear, and how easy it was for us to believe that silence meant safety. I see now that you were screaming long before you left. I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't know how to fix what we broke, but if you ever want me to sit beside you, even in silence, I will. I read it 3 times. Then I closed my laptop. I didn't respond. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to. Some letters don't require replies. Some apologies are not meant to open doors, but to acknowledge which ones have closed. In the morning, I found a seashell on my windowsill. No note. Just the shell white smooth with a tiny hole near the tip, like it had been strung once and worn close to the heart. A gift, maybe, or a message, or just the sea offering what it always does, memory disguised as chance. I kept it, placed it beside the drawing of me in the window chair. I don't know what happens next. I don't need to. My life no longer depends on their pages. I'm writing mine now, line by line, in full ink, no edits, no permissions. Summer arrived in a slow, deliberate way, like someone easing into a room where they weren't sure they belonged. The mornings warmed just enough that I stopped using the old wool cardigan. The windows stayed open longer, letting in the scent of salt and cut grass. In the evenings, the air softened around my skin like the world had stopped bracing itself. I started sleeping with the lights off. No night lamp, no hallway glow, just darkness complete and unafraid. I didn't realize until then how long I'd been afraid of quiet. I filled my days with small, unremarkable rituals, sweeping the porch, watering the basil writing lists I never followed. I taught my last art class of the season and told them I'd see them in the fall. One of the students, the quiet man with the furious strokes, left me a note folded inside a sketch of a cracked wall he'd drawn. Sometimes broken things don't need repair. They need recognition. I pinned it on my wall. That's how I think of my story now, not as something to be resolved, but something to be seen. A wound that no longer bleeds, only itches when the weather shifts. One morning while walking along the rocks past the cove, I saw a couple standing in the surf, their jeans soaked, their laughter reckless. The woman wore her gray hair loose, dancing in the wind. The man held her like something rare. For a moment, I imagined that could be me, another life, another chance. And then as quickly as the thought arrived, it passed. I didn't need romance to feel whole. I didn't need anyone to name me, to believe I existed. That same afternoon, I opened the drawer where I'd kept the old letters, the apology from my son, the message from my daughter, the unsigned note from my sister, even the letter from him, the one with the photo and the key. I didn't read them again. I simply folded them tighter, wrapped them in a length of linen, and buried them in the backyard beneath the rosemary bush. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing which memories I allowed to feed me. The rosemary bloomed purple weeks later. At the shop, I began helping with the window displays, arranging old books in crooked towers, hanging ribbons from the ceiling in colors that matched nothing and everything. Customers began to linger longer, asking who decorated the space. I did, I said once. It felt like truth, not bragging, just ownership. One afternoon, I saw my reflection in the bakery window and didn't flinch. I looked older than I remembered, lines at the corners of my mouth, a crease between my brows. But my eyes were steady, grounded, not waiting, not wanting, just there. That same week, the town invited me to speak at a local gathering, Creatives Over Coffee. They wanted me to talk about art, about memory, about place. I nearly declined, but something in me said yes. The room was small, maybe 20 people, folding chairs and mismatched mugs. I didn't speak of betrayal. I didn't name names. I spoke only of absence, of the strange sacred art of rebuilding without maps. At the end, a man in the back raised his hand and asked, "What did you lose when you left?" I paused. Everyone waited. I lost the version of myself who needed permission to exist. The silence that followed was thick with understanding. Afterward, people came up to thank me. A woman with a cane, a boy who couldn't meet my eyes, a retired nurse who said, "You reminded me I'm still allowed to begin again." That night, I walked the shore in bare feet and didn't care who saw me. The sea had pulled back far enough that I could step into its path. I let the water reach my ankles, then my calves. It was cold, but I didn't flinch. I stood there a long time, eyes closed, arms loose at my sides, as the tide whispered its way around me. I was not disappearing. I was arriving. The days began to blur in the way only contentment allows, not in chaos, not in forgetfulness, but in the gentle hum of days stitched together by peace. I kept my routines, but I no longer clung to them. If I missed a morning walk, I didn't feel the tug of guilt. If I spent a whole afternoon sketching nothing but the same line over and over, it didn't feel wasted. It felt like breath. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at the light on the kitchen tiles, just watching how it moved through the room as the day passed. It wasn't boredom, it was presence. Something I hadn't known I was missing until I stopped needing to prove I was useful. One Thursday, I came across a small worn-out flyer taped to the community board outside the cafe. Story night. Bring something you've never told anyone. I stood there a while wondering what I could possibly share that hadn't already been carved into my skin by silence. Then I smiled. I had plenty. That night I brought an old sketchbook, one of the ones they hadn't taken, one I'd carried out with me when I left. The pages were stained in places, the corners curled, but it still held the linework of my old life. Houses, cracks, windows closed. When it was my turn, I stood holding the book against my chest. The room was dark, lit only by fairy lights and a single bulb overhead. I said, once I gave everything I had to a house that didn't recognize me by the end. I built it, I filled it, I kept it breathing. And when I got sick, they rewrote my name in paperwork that said I was no longer mine. Someone in the back gasped softly. I left. Not because I was brave, but because I was erased, and I wanted to find out if I still existed outside the outline they'd drawn for me. I opened the book to the last page. It was blank. This is my favorite page, because it's the one I still get to decide. I closed the sketchbook. No applause, just stillness. Afterward, a woman approached me, mid-60s maybe, wore rings on every finger, and walked with a kind of deliberate grace. You told the story I never knew I needed to hear, she said. We didn't hug. We didn't exchange names. Just a glance. Just recognition. That night, I sat at my little table by the window and started a new sketchbook. On the first page, I drew a woman standing at the edge of a cliff wind, tearing through her hair, eyes forward. Behind her, the faint shadow of a house crumbling into the sea. She wasn't looking back. The next day, a letter arrived at my P.O. box, from my daughter again. I know you're not ready. I know trust isn't something I can ask for, but I've started therapy. Dad hasn't, but I have. I think I let myself believe him because it made the world simpler. It isn't. You deserved more. You still do. If you ever want to meet, not to talk about the past, not to fix it, just to sit, I'd like that. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't respond. But I folded the letter gently and placed it beside the others, now wrapped in soft linen, now buried with intention. They were no longer chains. They were roots. And roots don't demand you return. They only remind you where you've come from. In town, people started saying, I should sell my drawings, that they'd pay, that they'd frame them. I didn't say no, but I didn't say yes, because some things aren't made to be owned. They're made to be held for a while and then released, like silence, like stories, like names that no longer fit. Autumn arrived like an old friend who knew not to knock, just pushed the door open and let itself in. The trees along the cliffside turned brittle gold, and the mornings came wrapped in fog, so thick I could barely see the end of the street. I welcomed the quiet. I wrapped myself in it like a shawl. I found a rhythm that held me without tethering me. Mondays were for the sea. Tuesdays I taught. Wednesdays I wandered through secondhand shops, the edge of the woods, the long road past the cemetery, where no one was ever in a rush. I drew less, but when I did, the images came clearer. They no longer shook. My lines no longer trembled at the ends. I no longer felt the need to fill every inch of the page. Sometimes space is the point. I began volunteering at the library once a week, helping a boy named Michael with his reading. He was shy, maybe 10, and always wore a hoodie pulled up like a shield. He didn't speak much, just pointed at words and waited. I never asked him why he read so quietly. I just sat beside him, unmoving, unafraid of silence. One day as we packed up, he looked at me and said, "You don't talk much, but I think you're safe." I touched his shoulder. "So are you." We didn't say goodbye. We just nodded, like people who understood the weight of being invisible. That night, I found myself staring at a page in my journal and writing 3 words I hadn't expected I forgive them. Not out of obligation, not for their sake, but because I no longer needed the burden of carrying their absence like armor. They hadn't changed. Not really. I hadn't heard from my husband since the letter with the key. My sister sent one birthday card. My son left a voicemail after the holidays. No pressure, but I hope you're okay. I didn't reply, but I didn't erase them either. Forgiveness, I've found, is not the same as invitation. It's not a door you open again. It's the decision to no longer sit beside it. That Sunday, I went to the cliffs and brought my sketchbook. I didn't plan to draw, just to watch. But my hands moved anyway. I drew a tree bent, not broken, leaves half gone, but its roots ran deep into the soil, steady against the wind. Underneath, I wrote, "She stayed even when they forgot she was still standing." I closed the book gently. On the way home, I passed the shop window where they'd once posted my first flyer. The glass was filled with autumn leaves, each one painted by a child's hand. And in the center, taped with care, was one of my old sketches, the one of the open window house wind, blowing the curtains back. Someone had written in small letters beneath it, "We remember the woman who made room for light." I stood there a long time, not smiling, not crying, just standing, letting the moment fill me in quiet waves. Later that night, I brewed tea and stood barefoot on my porch. The wind tugged at my sleeves, and I could smell winter creeping in from the coast. I didn't brace against it. I welcomed it, because I had learned something no one ever taught me in the life I left. Peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the absence of permission-seeking. It's the space you take up simply because you can. The final snow came late, just dusting a soft white hush across the rooftops and the trees outside my window. I watched it fall from my chair knees, pulled up mug warm in my hands. The world looked suspended, like even time had paused to exhale. There was a moment not long ago when I thought this silence would be unbearable, when I feared that absence meant I had failed, that if I wasn't being needed, I wasn't real. But now I understand. Stillness is not void. It's proof that I exist, that I am here, that I no longer need to be summoned by someone else's longing to be whole. The wind rattled the window frame, and I reached for a blanket without thinking. Not out of discomfort, but instinct. A small kindness to myself. The kind no one ever taught me to offer. I haven't spoken to them in months. Not my daughter, not my sister, not even him. And I don't feel haunted by it anymore. I think they assumed I would return eventually quiet and forgiving a shadow of the woman they once rewrote. I think they mistook survival for submission. But I did not disappear. I relocated my center. In this town, people still wave when they pass. At the cafe, they save me the corner table. At the market, they ask if I'm sketching again. And at night, when the lamps flicker against the frost, I walk past the old chapel steps and trace my breath in the air like a child. Sometimes I write letters I'll never send. To them, to the woman I was, to the girl who believed love had to hurt to mean something. I seal them, then burn them in the fireplace. The flames curl around the edges like an exhale. Each time I whisper, "You are not forgotten," because I'm not. I am not the woman they claimed I was. I am not unstable. I am not fragile. I am not a burden. I am not a failed mother or wife or sister. I am not lost. I am Claire, and I am building something that needs no witness to be real. My final sketch in the book is of a woman walking barefoot in the snow, her coat unbuttoned, her eyes forward. Behind her, the suggestion of a house fading into the white. No door, no tether, only wind and silence, and one set of footprints sure and steady, mine. The hardest part was not leaving. It was staying gone, resisting the urge to make excuses for them, to rewrite the memories in softer ink, to pretend the silence was ever anything but chosen. I've learned to live in that truth, not bitter, not broken, just unflinching. There are days when I still remember the curve of my daughter's laugh when she was 5, or the way my husband used to look at me before our lives calcified into roles. I remember baking bread on rainy Sundays. I remember dancing barefoot in the kitchen. I remember the ache in my chest when I realized they no longer looked at me as someone they needed. But now I know my worth isn't measured by how tightly someone holds on. It's measured by how freely I exist, even when no one's watching. I walk the cliffs most mornings, not to escape anything, not to find meaning, just to feel the wind press against my chest and remind me I'm still here. Some treasures had been recovered. Others more valuable still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.